Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you listen to this program any length of time, you know that as we get closer to Thanksgiving, we love to use that as a time to teach about our nation's history. And this is no exception. And usually about this time of year, things are beginning to quiet down. Congress goes on recess, and there aren't a lot of issues in the news. And it's just a great time to kind of focus on American history. So in the second hour, we'll have an open line and cover all those issues, that many of which have transpired over just the last 24 hours, having to do with terrorism and refugee settlement and much more. But we still wanted to go ahead with this book called Washington and Hamilton: The Alliance That Forged America. And so I really encourage you to kind of sit back. This is a great time to learn about our nation and our history. And for those of you that might want to pass this on, as I've mentioned so often before, we have the opportunity for you to go to our website, pointofview.net, and download the podcast and play it again for somebody, or to send it to them and learn a little bit more about our history. And we are privileged today to have two of the authors of this book, Washington and Hamilton. We have information about them and the book on our website, pointofview.net. First of all, we have Professor Stephen Knott. He's a professor of national security affairs at the United States Naval War College. Earned his bachelor's degree from Assumption College, his PhD in political science from Boston College, author of a number of other books, Alexander Hamilton and the Persistence of Myth and Secret and Sanctioned Covert Operations in the American Presidency. He and his wife live in Massachusetts. We also are joined by Tony Williams, who is the development director of the Bill of Rights Institute, and also the program director at the Washington, Jefferson, and Madison Institute in Charlottesville, Virginia. Earned his bachelor's degree from Syracuse University, a master's in U.S. history from Ohio State, and has taught history for 15 years and author of 5 books. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Let's, if we can, maybe get in addition to George Washington, but I think if you really want to understand American history, that's one battle which Washington and
raised, and yet they're able to form this extremely fruitful collaboration for about 30 years, from the Revolution all the way up to the deaths.
Stephen, let me come to you for just another minute to talk about Hamilton. I think most of our listeners would know something about the history of George, those kinds of things, but having written 2 books on the subject, fill in a few. Even after the Washington going back to Mount Vernon,
Alexander Hamilton is what we would today call it was a real mess. And education, of course, his life would have taken a very different path. But you're right, after the war ends, remember the Continental Congress, he is 1780 as a soldier. This is not working. This arrangement work, and we need a stronger central government, especially in terms of national security and national defense. So to scrap
about the contribution of General George Washington, articles of individuals, because I've been talking to take Alexander Hamilton off of it, but most people about Alexander Hamilton probably couldn't tell you tell us that much about George Washington, but after this program is over, break. The book is entitled Washington, and our authors right after these messages.
Viewpoint.
Is covered selectively. Certain voices and perspectives are given prominence, others are not. But a more common form of media bias occurs when media outlets simply ignore a story that does not fit the in operation when he worked at the Los Angeles Times and when he has worked with various concerns. How the media pushes their super story. You can see this in how they cover Muslims. When a radical Muslim beheaded a female co-worker in Oklahoma City last year, there was very little press coverage. Compare that to how the media focused lots of attention on a Muslim boy who was suspended from school in Texas for bringing a clock to school that authorities mistook for a bomb. Robert Knight sees the media bias by omission in the November 2015 elections, when the voters in Houston overwhelmingly defeated a homosexual transgender non-discrimination proposition. I wondered how they would cover it. Many media outlets hardly talked about it. Others cited it as an example of hate winning over compassion. The voters understood what was going on, especially when the mayor of Houston tried to subpoena the sermons of pastors who worked to try to get the proposition on the ballot so that citizens of Houston could vote on it. And while the media did report that Kentucky elected a new governor, they didn't report the reason for the victory. Tea Party favorite Matt Bevin surprised many because he won by embracing social issues. In fact, he even visited County Clerk Kim Davis when she was in jail. You may remember that she was the clerk who refused to issue same-sex marriage. You only need to look at what the press says about Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search
You're listening to supported source for truth.
And once again, the alliance that forged America. Stephen Knott and Tony Williams are with where this kind of growth of revolutionary ideology came from. You talk about this in the book. Of course, the Stamp Act. You have Patrick Henry rising to offer resolutions protesting the Stamp Act. George Washington hears about that. Of course, we just talked a minute ago about heard around the world, but at the same time, they were very much instrumental even in kind of raising the consciousness of the need for an American revolution, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. The British started taxing the Americans. They had this huge debt from the French and Indian War. They also start putting restrictions on Americans moving past the Appalachian Mountains and therefore seeming to violate their property rights. And both Washington and Hamilton, when he arrives in America, even as a young college student, barely 19 years old, both are, although they don't write the famous kind of pamphlets and lead the charge sort of like a Samuel Adams or a Thomas Paine, both we argue, Steve and I, are really instrumental in making those arguments for liberty. They talk about liberty, self-government, taxation by the consent of the governed, those rights of Englishmen, but they're also talking about their natural rights from God and the purpose of government is to protect those rights. Washington does this primarily in the House of Burgesses and also through a lot of letters that he writes to various correspondents. And Hamilton sort of joins in with the demonstrations by the Sons of Liberty in New York, and also writes some really important pamphlets, including Farmer Refuted, which probably are lesser known than, let's say, Thomas Paine's Common Sense, but really articulated the cause of liberty and self-government.
Well, let's see if we can maybe bring them into the revolution. You have General Washington, and he was already seen sort of as the father of our country simply because of having that reputation of having fought before and then, of course, leading the revolution. Then you have this upstart Alexander Hamilton who gets involved and I guess gets the attention of George Washington as I read your book in the Battle of New York. But fill us in on some of those details.
Well, that's right. In fact, it's still not entirely clear how Hamilton came to Washington's attention. There are sort of different theories out there. One says this General Nathaniel Greene was the one who recommended Hamilton to Washington. There's another account that says that Washington himself actually witnessed Hamilton drilling this artillery company that Hamilton had raised just prior to the Battle of New York, the Battle of Long Island. And so we're not sure, but for some reason there was something about Hamilton that captured Washington's interest, and that was, I think, his attention to detail, his incredible energy. This was a man who could work from dawn until dusk and beyond, and also just an incredibly sharp mind for such a young person. As Tony said, we're talking here about someone in their late teens, and he was already impressing so many adults, including George Washington.
I'd love to have both of you kind of address the issue. It comes up later on in terms of the issue of slavery, but here you have Hamilton coming and seeing, of course, slavery face to face in what at that time was called the West Indies, what we call the Caribbean. George Washington kind of even later changing his mind about some of that. But that's kind of an interesting kind of backstory that oftentimes is brought up, because today a lot of people say, well, I can't respect George Washington as a father of our country because he had slaves. But they were in the process, I think, both of them coming to realize what a great evil that was in terms of society.
Yeah, as you said, Hamilton sees the sort of the horrors of slavery in the Caribbean, where it was particularly bad. They worked slaves to death and just imported more rather than providing any kind of sustenance, and becomes, one of the leaders against slavery in the country, really an unacknowledged role. He and his friend John Lawrence, who also served in the military, was a young man from South Carolina. They had a plan of arming the slaves and allowing them to fight for their freedom. Yes. And it's not passed, it's not accepted, but it's a pretty radical thing during the Revolution. And then after the war, helps to start the New York Abolition Society. So Hamilton's a really key player in all of this. Washington starts to grow against slavery. He starts to have moral objections to the institution itself, but he also sees the economic inefficiencies of it and really becomes an advocate of free labor. And then later on, at his death, of course, in his will, he frees his slaves upon Martha's death, and also provides for them, provides sustenance for them and a living for the older slaves, as well as an education. And so, Washington sets that moral example of anti-slavery at his death.
And I might just mention that you talk about in the book, too, that free blacks fought for the ideal of liberty from the very beginning of the war at Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill and others. And so even though maybe this is an issue that I know some people have with their attitude of these so-called founding fathers, I think you have to add the rest of that in history. I think you've done a very good job of that in the book. But just before we get to a next break, let's, if we can, maybe talk about the end, because as you say, Yorktown is the end. And at this point, then there's sort of a mindset on the part of, say, George Washington to go back. He's actually been able to liberate the country, probably figured he'd spend the rest of his life in Mount Vernon. Alexander Hamilton, for a while, as you said, thought about a commission and some other things like that, but had to support his family. But both of them actually believed that there was something, as you say in your book, deeply flawed with the way the American government, to the extent that there was one, had conducted the war. And they were fearful of what that would look like in the future under, of course, the Articles of Confederation.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, throughout the entire war, Washington and Hamilton as his closest advisor, closest military staff member, were constantly pleading with Congress, with the Continental Congress, with the states to provide men, equipment, ammunition, and so forth. And it's actually an incredible story of persistence in the face of repeated setbacks, because Congress was either not able to get its act together, or the states were unwilling to contribute to a military effort, particularly, for instance, once the war moved more towards the middle Atlantic states, the zeal that New England states felt for the war was sort of ebbed. So there was just a kind of parochialism, I think would be the word, that permeated the deliberations both in various state houses and in the Congress, that this was someone else's problem. And for Washington and Hamilton, this was a question of national security. I mean, if you cannot field an army and a navy in an adequate manner, then you are risking the entire American experiment, and they were determined to change that.
Well, we need to take a break. When we come back, maybe we can address that, because as many of these colonists had faced under the British rule, they were concerned about the heavy centralization of government. But they also, as you pointed out, were concerned about a weak national government, and one that, in a sense, was not functioning effectively. And that's where you begin to see that, once again, after winning the war, now they have to, if you will, win the peace. After actually gaining independence, now begin to talk about what it means to establish a true republic, where you have certain powers which are delegated to the federal government and other powers which are reserved to the states and the people. So we're going to take a break, and if you would like to join the conversation, of course, I think in the second hour we'll have a lot more conversation topics, but if you want to just sit back and listen, fine. But if you'd like to join us, the number is 1-800-351-1212. Talking about the book Washington and Hamilton, The Alliance That Forged America. It is published by Source Books. If you go to our website, pointofview.net, you can find out more about both of our authors, Stephen Knott and Tony Williams, and we have bios for both of them there. We also have information about the book in case you a copy there as well, both in hardback and Kindle. And so again, visit our website, pointofview.net. If you would like to maybe listen to this again, as we've mentioned before, there is a podcast which is available, or of course we also have the Livecast. And so that is a place where you can go to the YouTube channel, the Point of View YouTube channel, and listen to that, or maybe pass it on to other individuals that might find this interesting, because we'd certainly like to give this publicity as much as possible. So we'll try to publicize the book and give you a chance to know a little bit more about it. But when we come back, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about now the developing of a real of that government is what we'll focus our time and attention on. And as you will see, Washington and Hamilton, very important in the American Revolution, absolutely key as well in terms of the Continental Congress, eventually the Constitutional Convention, and the ratification of the U.S. Constitution through the writing of the Federalist Papers and other things. So let's take a break. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again as we talk about the book Washington and Hamilton, The Alliance That Forged America. Privileged to have with us for a little bit longer Stephen Knott and Tony Williams, the authors of the book. And again, this book is about 350 pages, about 250 pages of content, and then that much material just in terms of the various bibliographies and footnotes and all sorts of other resources. You can find it probably in your local bookstore. It's published by Source Books, but if not, we have a link on our website. Well, gentlemen, let's, if we can, for just a minute, then talk about the chaos after the Revolutionary War and what even led up to the Constitutional Convention, where Benjamin Franklin later used this metaphor of a kind of a two-headed snake that died of thirst because each head wanted to go in a different way but stopped by a twig. Alexander Hamilton used more harsh language about his countrymen, but I can't say that on radio, so I'll pass on that. But nevertheless, you talk about some of the tensions, the dissension, and later what you actually write about, the two roads to Philadelphia. But talk, if you would, for just a minute about what happened after the Revolutionary War and before we had the Constitutional Convention.
Sure. Well, a lot of people don't know that there was just a great deal of contention and sort of chaos under the Articles of Confederation after the Revolution. The American soldiers and officers, they were unpaid for months, if not, in some cases, years. They almost launched a mutiny, which George Washington suppresses, and what you might say is his finest hour, to quote or to paraphrase Churchill.
Mm-hmm.
But also, the states are at war. They're almost shooting at each other. They have trade disputes. The national government cannot collect any taxes. The British are riding roughshod over violating the peace treaty from 1783. And, of course, there's Shays' Rebellion, which, on top of all of this course of events, just completely horrifies, especially Washington, but also Hamilton, that this government is just unable to govern.
And again, Hamilton was probably the key person, kind of one of the most, as you said, most committed politician in America to actually focusing on the idea of revising the Articles of Confederation. And I think most people fail to realize that. If you wanted to talk about the achievement that most people know for Alexander Hamilton, maybe Secretary of Treasury or something like that, I don't think anybody realizes that, again, he was one of the more significant driving forces to change the type of government we had and to move from just founding this country to framing a constitution, which today we actually benefit from.
Yes, of course, he had a lot of help from James Madison from Virginia, but and that was a very interesting, albeit brief, alliance between this New York lawyer, Hamilton, and this Virginia political figure, James Madison, and they were the ones who led the drive for the first convention, which doesn't get a lot of attention in American history, but the Annapolis Convention, which was designed to settle some of the trade disputes that Tony alluded to. But really what comes out of the Annapolis Convention is a call for this national, ultimately constitutional convention that will meet in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. So Hamilton working in concert with Madison, they're the two that really drive this push to convene some sort of a convention to perhaps revise or even scrap the Articles of Confederation.
And they were then delegates, of course, as you said, to the Annapolis Convention, which formed, like you said, some kind of limited alliance, which then now brings us to the Constitutional Convention. And this is difficult because you have a number of states that are concerned that they might lose their power because, of course, we're going to talk about the compromise and everything. Some might lose it because they're too small. Some might lose it because they have too much population. Many of them wonder whether or not they would even be able to sell it back in their home states. But talk about that kind of tension that they were dealing with once we get to the Constitutional Convention.
For Hamilton, of anyone, faced probably the most opposition, even within his own delegation at the Constitutional Convention, because New York, other states didn't want to relinquish that power that they had in their states to this new national government. They feared this consolidation. They're called anti-federalists. And Then New York actually sends 3 delegates, but 2 of them are anti-federalists. So Hamilton is completely frustrated during the entire summer that he's outvoted, and eventually those 2 delegates leave. And so Hamilton doesn't even really have a quorum to vote officially in the convention. And so he's terribly frustrated, and for him, it's just further evidence of this collapse, of this weakness, of the problem of having that just government run by the states and a very weak central government. And of course, Washington says less throughout the convention, and he's in the chair. And as Steve said, he's lending legitimacy to the entire thing. But he certainly supported the Virginia plan. He has many conversations and exchanges of letters with Madison, and is certainly on board for strengthening the government because of his experience during the war with Congress and the states.
So again, you have the Virginia plan. Let's talk about some of the other ideas that were swirling around there, some of which Hamilton accepted, some of which he rejected, some which built alliances with people like Madison or Washington, others that did not. Can you give us a perspective of what that's like? Because we see the finished product. We all have reverence for the Constitution, but it really was a whole series of compromises, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, interestingly enough, James Madison being the key, arguably the key figure from the Virginia delegation, he presents something that becomes known as the Virginia Plan, as you mentioned, and that has a very nationalist tincture to it. In other words, it calls for a strong central government. I believe even at one point that Madison favored giving the federal government, the Congress, the power to veto state legislation, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. Yeah. So, yes, there were a whole series of compromises. Hamilton stakes out a very extreme, for the time, and I guess even for our time, nationalist position. For instance, he calls for a president elected for life, and he can hold that office as long as he behaves himself. Now, he would still be subject to impeachment. There would be certain checks on him. But Hamilton stakes out this extreme position, and Tony and I at least suggest the possibility that by staking out that extreme nationalist, perhaps even consolidationist position, he gives the more moderate proposals, the more moderate nationalist proposals, greater credibility, greater. They're much more palatable to the delegates than his extreme position.
I think that may surprise some of the people, but again, you can see why you might think that a president should serve for life, because in the back of his mind, maybe even the forefront of his mind, is even sitting there, he's looking at George Washington, and
exactly.
That's certainly the case. Well, let's wind this down, because I want to get just before we get to after the next segment to ratification. But of course, there's the allegedly asked Benjamin Franklin. Of course, we don't know how apocryphal it is. We got a republic or a monarchy? A republic, replied the doctor, if you can keep it. And of course, you have Hamilton now coming away not necessarily enthusiastic about the Constitution, but at the same time, then, interestingly enough, gives a lot of push and emphasis on actually trying to get it ratified. And just before we take a break, let's talk about that, because there's got to be a little bit of ambivalence in the mind of Alexander Hamilton, wasn't there?
Well, I think what Steve and I argue is that all the delegates had a certain ambivalence about the Constitution and didn't know that it would quite last and didn't know what to expect and whether Americans or any people were really meant to govern themselves. And this was sort of an experiment in liberty. And so they didn't know the outcome. And all of them, there were parts that each delegate maybe had problems with and maybe supported the lion's share of the document. So, and Hamilton's one who says, look, this is the best we could have gotten. It's what we have, and now we're going to argue for its ratification. We've got to do something. We have a national crisis, emergency with these articles of consideration. And so he becomes one of the main proponents of ratification in New York. He also engages in a lot of letter-writing campaigns, and of course, is one of the main authors of the Federalist Papers. He composes the lion's share of them, about 55 out of 85. And
Yes.
so he is like a one-man wrecking crew for ratification, you might say.
We will talk about that after the break, and we'll talk about winning ratification, and then just a little bit about the idea of an indispensable president and an indispensable alliance, just a couple of issues that are still out of the book. And, of course, the only way you can really understand all of this is to read the book, but I think we've done a pretty good job so far of summarizing a number of those chapters. So let's take a break. And, again, if you just joined us, we're talking about this new book. It's called Washington and Hamilton, The Alliance That Forged America. And if you look at your dollar bill, your $10 bill, you recognize these are very significant individuals, and we learn an enormous amount about them, not only with the American Revolution, but also in the establishment. In a minute, the ratification. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we talk about the book Washington and Hamilton. Again, this is a book that you might want to have on your shelf and to read, The Alliance That Forged America. Stephen Knott and Tony Williams with us. In the second hour, we're going to get back to what is in the news. We have a lot to talk about today with the refugee settlement policies, some votes in Congress, as well as some issues on the war on terror, and maybe even into some of the commotion on campus these days. So lots of things to talk about in the second hour. But as we wind down, let's, if we can, talk about ratification. And again, we have the first essay for the Federalist Papers. Of course, they wouldn't call that at the time, but I've said that some might call them the most famous newspaper columns ever written. But the first one written by Alexander Hamilton under the pseudonym Publius that appeared in the New York Independent Journal. Then a number written by James Madison, and this was all written gentlemen, in large part because they wanted to make sure that New York, the state of New York, would ratify the Constitution. So we can really understand a little bit more by looking at the notes to the Constitutional Convention, but we can learn even more by reading the Federalist Papers to understand what was in the minds and the hearts of those individuals who were the framers of the Constitution, can't we?
Oh, that's absolutely true, and it's a matter of fact that the Federalist Papers are frequently cited in Supreme Court decisions. They're constantly referred to by American presidents, and of course, they're routinely taught, or at least they should be routinely taught, in introductory American government courses at the college level. So this is a sort of classic analysis of the American Constitution, and as you know, you captured it perfectly because these essays were written in a very short period of time. In other words, Hamilton and Madison primarily are firing these things out under the gun because these were not only sort of brilliant analyses of the Constitution, but they were political documents. They were intended to get this Constitution ratified. So Hamilton and Madison and Jay, to some extent, were constantly trying to meet these newspaper deadlines, writing these things around the clock at a sort of frenetic pace. And it's amazing that they are so intellectually impressive, considering that they were operating under the gun like that.
That is what is so amazing, because you know as well as I do, you've both been teachers, and I've been a teacher as well, that if you were to ask a typical student to read the Federalist Papers, the first comment you would get, and I usually assign something like maybe Federalist Paper number 10, Federalist Paper number 51, read by Madison, or maybe some by Hamilton on the Judiciary, 51, whatever it might, 57, some of those. But anyway, the bottom line is that they all say, well, these are really hard to understand. I say, you got to understand, these are individuals sort of writing on the fly. They don't have the Google search that you have access today. They're pulling a fair amount of this out of their heads from things that they have read. Now, you do talk about Madison receiving a number of books from Jefferson when they came to the Annapolis Convention, but still, this is just amazing, the incredible ability that they could articulate this in such a coherent way and in such intellectual and coherent manner. It is amazing to me, and it illustrates maybe the fact that our American education system needs a little bit of an upgrade. What do you think?
Yeah, I was an educator at the high school level, middle school level for 15 years, and now I'm involved in a lot of teacher professional development and education. And, every single survey out there shows that, our American youth are just knowing less and less about the history of their country, less and less about the founders, less and less about civics. And, we're sort of in a spiral, and unless things change, it's probably just going to get worse before it gets better. I hate to be pessimistic. But, the Founding Fathers, they had excellent classical educations.
Yes.
They read the great books of Western civilization, particularly of Greece and Rome, but also modern history and science and so forth. They were very well educated. Everyone understood their classical allusions when they made them in the houses of the legislatures. And they could articulate these ideals of liberty and self-government very, very well, and we're glad they did, whatever our failings today.
Yes. Well, again, I try to counter some of that even on this radio program. But just before we run out of time, maybe, Stephen, I'll come to you. You've got a chapter here on the indispensable president. This all came together in a constitution, but again, one thing that I think sealed the ability to make this nation work was having George Washington, already seen sort of as the father of our country, become the president. And because of that, and because of his seal of approval on the Constitution, and because of the work of people like Alexander Hamilton in getting the Constitution ratified, we enjoy a nation in large part because of that indispensable president, don't we?
Without a doubt. He was the one national figure that existed at I suppose you could put Ben Franklin into the mix, but Ben Franklin is 83 years old at the Constitutional Convention. So George Washington was the one national figure who would have been known from Georgia up through New Hampshire. And he was trusted, and he was a war hero. But in addition to that, he was also, thank God, a man of moderation. In other words, and Tony kind of alluded to this earlier, there were opportunities where Washington could have sort of seized power in a sense. And he never did that. He was always very moderate in terms of his approach to power, always willing to walk away from it when necessary. And the American people understood that. And that's why they gave him their support, and perhaps more importantly, gave their support to this new Constitution. You remove Washington from the equation, and I really don't think that, as we started the show off with, that any of this happens. He's indispensable, as Tony and I say. And we also try to make the case that Hamilton in some ways provides a lot of the intellectual firepower. Washington was a very, very smart man. He was certainly smarter politically than Hamilton was. But the two combined, you put Washington's moderation, Washington's the reverence for Washington that exists out there, and you couple that with Hamilton's firepower, and you've just got a very impressive mix.
Very good. Well, again, I encourage our listeners, even as you pull out and you see the pictures of these two individuals, it might be worth knowing a little bit more about them. And that's one of the reasons why we like to do these history programs from time to time. And I would commend to you this book, Washington and Hamilton, The Alliance That Forged America. It is published by Source Books, and we have information about it on our website. You probably can find it in the local bookstore, but if not, we've made it very easy for you to order. Stephen Knott and Tony Williams have been with us. Gentlemen, I think it's been a great interview, and thank you for joining me today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
We will take a break, and when we come back, going to get into the issues of the news. But again, we wanted to encourage you to learn a little bit more about America's history, and I'm sure that this gave you maybe an interest or even a taste of what is in the book, and the desire that I hope some of you would have to read a little bit more about our history, maybe even read those Federalist Papers we were talking about, so many of them written by Alexander Hamilton, the rest by James Madison, as well as John Jay. And those are individuals that had a profound influence in our country, and certainly one of the reasons why I think it's still important for us to study all of this. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, well, we have the no-go zones in France. That's where we found the mastermind of the killing and the massacre in Paris, and certainly Andrew McCarthy has some things to say about that, and we've posted that. We also have a number of individuals that have been caught with fake passports, Syrians with fake passports trying to come into the United States, others caught at the border, and then what has happened to some of the refugees that have been brought here. We now have, first of all, the story, and I'm going to continue that about what happened in Louisiana. But now ABC News is actually giving us really chilling stories that are coming out tonight, and we will post that information as well about what happened when we had terrorists that came in here from Iraq. They were able to walk right in, even when we knew that they might be potential terrorists. Doesn't make us feel real good about bringing tens of thousands of more from Syria or Iraq into this country unless we can vet them a little more effectively than we have in the past. Let's take a break. We have lots to talk about, and I welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about all that right after these important messages.
Kerby Anderson and Point of View don't have major corporate support. We need your support to continue. As U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert told us recently,
it just scares me to think about that voice of reason, a Christian voice, a wise man. I hate to think about what would happen if your voice were silenced just because the money was not there to stay on the air.
Make a difference starting at just $1 a day, $30 a month, or $65 underwrites 1 minute of our program. 1 minute standing for fiscal responsibility, promoting a sane foreign policy, defending the reliability of the Bible. Please pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Click the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team today. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Open line. This is an opportunity for you to join with us, and perhaps you have comments or questions about any kind of topic that we're going to put on the table. A lot of it has to do with a little bit more information about those individuals that seem to be trying to penetrate into the United States. And if you would like to go to our website, pointofview.net, I'm going to just mention a few of the articles I've posted, and that gives you, I think, a flavor for what is happening. First article I've posted here: confirmed 8 Syrians caught at the Texas border in Laredo. The Department of Homeland Security has confirmed that 8 Syrians were taken into custody at the Laredo port of entry. The 2 federal agents operating under the umbrella of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection are claiming that 8 Syrian illegal aliens attempted to enter Texas from Mexico in the Laredo sector. The federal agents spoke with this particular group, Breitbart, Texas, on the condition of anonymity. However, a local president of the National Border Patrol Council confirmed that the Laredo Border Patrol agents have been officially contacting the organization with concerns over reports from other federal agents about Syrians illegally entering the country in the Laredo sector, and these reports have caused agents. So that is the first article we've posted there. You can read it in its entirety. But that has to do with what actually took place on the American border. Then we have an article that was posted about 5 Syrians. Now it's been updated to 6 Syrians with fake passports that were captured on their way to the United States. These as well. Why would you have a fake passport? And some of these individuals look like they might actually intend something, rather than just simply come here for some kind of opportunity to enjoy the American experience. So we have, of course, as I mentioned, 8 Syrians caught at the Texas border in Laredo. 6 Syrians actually are detained there in Honduras. The article that you have there is from last night, which has 5, but now they have a 6th Syrian with fake passports. Okay, so that's a couple of those that we have posted. There are some others we haven't posted because after a while you'll just wear out, but let me at least mention this one. 6 men from Pakistan and Afghanistan were actually taken into custody because they were entering into Arizona from Mexico. The study says a highly trusted federal agent working under a group composed of 5 Pakistani men and 1 man from Afghanistan were captured at the U.S. Border Patrol, and by the Border Patrol, I should say, agents, after having illegally crossed the porous U.S.-Mexican border at the Tucson sector of Arizona. The 6 men were traveling in a group were captured roughly 16 miles into the state of Arizona, specifically near one of these towns in Arizona, and that took place on Monday night. By the way, Border Patrol agents were unable to do extensive interviews with the 6 Middle Eastern men because the Federal Bureau of Investigation took over the matter, on where the FBI took custody. And then on Wednesday evening, a report by other federal agents claimed that the 8 Syrian illegal aliens were captured while attempting to enter the United States in the Laredo sector. And, of course, now the Department of Homeland Security has taken over there. Just gives you a little bit of a feel for what is happening at our border or those who want to enter in as well. So that's one issue on the table. A second one is one we talked about yesterday, and that is a story that we had, and we actually did some interviews with Faith McDonald. Her piece called U.S. Christian Groups Are Prioritizing Muslim Refugees Over Christian Ones. Here's why. That article was posted yesterday, but you can again find it on our website, pointofview.net. But I found this in a Refugee Resettlement Watch. This is a little different, but it illustrates the same point, that during the first 6 weeks of this new fiscal year, which, by the way, starts in September, and 826 were Muslim, and one was Christian. And by the way, when I say Christian, it just means non-Muslim in that particular case. And it illustrates again that those Somalians that were actually resettled, most of those were resettled in the state of Minnesota, but also in Arizona, New York, Ohio, and Texas. And you can actually see a map of that as well. Then, one of the other stories I talked about the other day, this is one that I thought would be helpful, was when we have brought individuals here, we've lost track of many of them. And one of the examples I used is from Louisiana, but let me give you the full story, because I just mentioned it in passing the other day. Perhaps some of you would like to know a little more of the details, especially those of you that are living in the state of Louisiana. And this comes from Jack Davis. He says, in theory, the federal program to resettle refugees screens out potential terrorists and works with local communities as partners to track the refugees and ensure resettlement is a success. Well, from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, comes new evidence that in reality, once refugees are in the country, they can just disappear with no one the least bit the wiser. This case also revealed that there is no communication to alert state governments what the federal government is doing right under the state's noses. A lot of this comes from the TV station WBRZ that reported that one Syrian refugee that was supposedly in charge of the person and the process. According to WBRZ, they said, quote, Catholic Charities helped the refugee who settled in Baton Rouge, but said the immigrant left for another state after a couple of days, and they don't know where the refugee went since they don't track them. Of course, this was not the only unpleasant surprise. WBRZ reported that until this past weekend, when state officials heard the news on television, Louisiana officials did not even know that Louisiana had already actually resettled 14 Syrian refugees, including 7 in Kenner and 6 in the New Orleans area. And we've talked about that before, that we've already heard the government saying, we don't have to tell the state when we are resettling these refugees. We don't have to tell you who they are. We don't have to tell you when we're going to do it. And you don't have any ability to stop it. So those are just a couple of issues. But when we come back from the break, what I'd like to do, first of all, is take some phone calls, but also then bring to you a story that came out of ABC News. Brian Ross, who's done a lot of investigative reporting over the years, says there are very good pieces of evidence that we don't do a very good job of vetting these refugees. And this is a story that goes back to a case out of Kentucky. So our listeners in Kentucky may be familiar with it. If not, you can watch it tonight on ABC News, but we have some advanced information from them, and we will post that article there as well. Then I want to get into a piece by Andrew McCarthy about what has been happening in France. These so-called no-go zones are a place where many of the Muslims are found. That's actually where the individual who was the mastermind of the killing that took place last weekend actually was killed, and where others were apprehended. And we're going to talk about what that means and lessons we can learn from that as well. Well, let's take a break, and if you'd like to join the conversation today, we're going to talk for just a little bit longer, at least, about the resettlement programs, some sad lessons we've learned about what has happened when we've tried to resettle some refugees from Iraq, and how some of them turned out to be terrorists. And then, of course, we'll get into some other topics as well. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Media bias comes in many forms,
Bias shows up when we see how a story is covered selectively. Certain voices and perspectives are given prominence, others are not. But a more common form of media bias occurs when media outlets simply ignore a story that does not fit their narrative. Robert Knight has seen this in operation when he worked at the Los Angeles Times and when he has worked with various conservative organizations. He writes about how the media pushes their super story. You can see this in how they cover Muslims. When a radical Muslim beheaded a female co-worker in Oklahoma City last year, there was very little press coverage. Compare that to how the media focused lots of attention on a Muslim boy who was suspended from school in Texas for bringing a clock to school that authorities mistook for a bomb. Robert Knight sees the media bias by omission in the November 2015 elections. When the voters in Houston overwhelmingly defeated a homosexual transgender non-discrimination proposition, I wondered how they would cover it. Many media outlets hardly talked about it. Others cited it as an example of hate winning over compassion. The voters understood what was going on, especially when the mayor of Houston tried to subpoena the sermons of pastors who worked to try to get the proposition on the ballot so that citizens of Houston could vote on it. And while the media did report that Kentucky elected a new governor, they didn't report the reason for the victory. Tea Party favorite Matt Bevin surprised many because he won by embracing social issues. In fact, he even visited County Clerk Kim Davis when she was in jail. You may remember that she was the clerk who refused to issue same-sex marriage licenses with her name on the certificate. So if you want to see media bias, you not only need to look at what the press says about a story, but you also need to notice what stories they ignore. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about the resettlement of refugees and all sorts of other issues related to this war on terror and what is happening to our country and how we can make the wisest decisions about the individuals that are allowed to come here and how we can assimilate them back into American society. Let's give you a chance to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to North Carolina first. And Paul, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for taking my call. There are a great many issues that are going on, but not only with the refugee issue, but just immigration in general, the lack of assimilation, the losing of our society, the overreach by federal government of bringing people into the community, not even alerting the local authorities of potential of something to happen, and basically telling the governors. Our governor here in North Carolina was one who protested, and it basically asked, how are you vetting these people? They're coming out of a broken country. They're coming, you can go by who they say they are, but how do you prove who they are? And, I thought that was a very fair question. And now the reaction from the president is very disturbing to me. He's basically acting very childish, calling them names, saying, well, now you're concerned about a 3-year-old immigrant. Well, these people, I think the vast majority of them are peace-loving and looking for help, but it only takes a handful, as we saw in France, to wreak havoc on a society. I'm very concerned and appalled by the reaction of the president and many of those who support him.
Well, I agree with you, and we've actually had some members of Congress saying, Mr. President, how about you come back over here and say those? And number two, let's have an open debate about this instead of name calling. And like I say this so often, but I need to say it again: name calling is not an argument. Making fun of me is not an argument. Saying that that's hate speech is not an argument. Give me an argument, And what we're getting is name calling, and we need a very intelligent and articulate discussion of what this means. And when people say you're intolerant, you're bigot, you're xenophobic, you don't have compassion, well, then again, the question you'd say is, well, then where would you draw the line? Or would you? In other words, I mean, I don't think we can get, a billion people into this country. So let's think this through. We're at 320 million. We bring in 1 million legally every year, and then anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million come in here every year illegally. And now we're talking about bringing in 100,000 more from places that we don't know too much about. We don't know what they intend, and we don't know what's in their heart. For at least rational people, you would say, I'd want to know some more information. And it isn't just these 27 governors that are asking that question. There are members of Congress that are going to be voting on these issues today and tomorrow as well. So let's have an honest and open discussion. And if you have answers to all those questions, the American people will back down. But right now, 2/3 of Americans have real questions about the policy that's being implemented.
Yes, and the primary responsibility of our government, the president, his first and foremost care should be about the safety of its people.
I would certainly say so. And matter of fact, our next caller wants to address that issue. So, Paul, thank you for starting us off today. Appreciate your phone call.
Bye-bye.
Let's see if we can go to Oklahoma. Winston, I think you want to make the case, so let me give you that opportunity.
Well, Kerby, I want to say a couple things. First, it was a great program today. I tell you what I'd like to see happen. I'd like to see them reinstitute history and civics in the public schools of America and make point of view part of the mandatory curriculum.
Thank you. We have enough out there that we have done over the years on all sorts of different issues, and we'll continue to do that. And if anything, I want to do this because I recognize that our young people listening to this program have been cheated. They didn't learn some of this in school. Matter of fact, you and I sound like we're a little bit older than the average listener there. We probably didn't learn all that much either. And so it's time to do some re-education in the positive sense of that word and learning a little bit more about America's founding and some of our founding fathers.
Well, that's the truth. And, we learned the generics of it, but we sure didn't learn the details of it like what we heard today. And, that's all the more reason that I think that the American people need to get re-engaged in what's going on around them. You're familiar with Os Guinness, I assume.
Oh, sure. We've had him on a couple times.
Yeah, and Os Guinness tells us very clearly that our founding fathers knew and they understood that true liberty and freedom came from the hand of God himself and that it can only be sustained by him. And so we've got ourselves in a real difficult problem, and the refugee problem and things that are happening with that. First, I want to ask you a question. History kind of tells us that a strong and free nation can be overcome by a lesser country that are more barbaric. That's the lesson of history. And radical Islam, and really even Islam itself, seems to me to be a seditionist ideology. And I don't hear many people talking about that. They don't want to use that term. Now, it's my understanding that Donald Trump told us that he would begin to investigate the Islamic mosque, and I believe that should have been done a long time ago.
And the few people that have done that, and we've had some of them on the program, certainly Frank Gaffney as well as Stephen Amerson and some others, and they have all said that when they've been able to send in surrogates into the Friday mosque messages, they basically concluded after their survey, which was pretty extensive. I mean, it wasn't just a few mosques here and there. It was quite a number, and I believe it was more than 100. They came to the conclusion that at least half of the messages they heard on a Friday in those mosques should concern Homeland Security. So it's not surprising that in France, the French interior minister actually wants to close down some of the mosques in France. I don't think that's going to go anywhere, but it is interesting that you're having not only in France is talking about this possibility, and now you have at least one presidential candidate talking about at least investigating that. So we'll see where that goes.
I would like to see the term sedition begin to be part of the discussion, and it's not. Now, let me get to my question, and then I'll let you go to the next guy. I've got real concerns about three of our major institutions in America today. I've got real concerns about our free press. The free press, as set forth by our founding fathers, was to protect truth, not to become a purveyor of defending lies and distortions and innuendos. And the free press that we have today is not free press at all. It's a distortion of the truth almost at every turn. So I want to find out exactly how we can deal with that. And let me just make this point. The big money that they're spending on the presidential election, the cost of a guy running for office is to raise money so that he can get television time, and we're feeding the beast. And that money goes for other things within the confines of every one of those major networks. And I think that needs to be looked at. I think it needs to be revisited. Secondly is our Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court has now become more of a dictatorial body telling us what we have to do, even in spite of the wishes of the people. And then this third one is a huge, huge concern for me, and I think that it probably was going to get me into some real trouble. But I believe that we have a benign pulpit in America today, and we need to have men of God to reclaim their position of being watchmen on the wall and to stand up for the truth with love, with clarity and conviction, and not back down. There's a few men that are doing it. Ed Young did it down in Houston. Robert Jeffers is doing it there in Dallas. But we need more men across this country that will fill the pulpits with fire and truth. And so those are three things that are a big concern to me. And my question to you, Kerby, is what can we do about it?
Well, first of all, we're trying to do some of it right now by providing a national forum for you and others to speak to that issue. Number two, one of my commentaries that's coming out is one that we've talked about before. That is the desire to really encourage pastors to address many of those issues. And there is a study that was done by George Barna. It's in my commentary, and we also talked about that with George Barna and Gary Frazier the other day, because the survey showed very clearly that most Americans who are Christians, who are in church, want their pastors to address many of those issues. And they weren't just the hot button issues like abortion and same-sex marriage. They were also things all the way down to things like the size and scope of government spending, immigration, and the rest. And what you found is pastors would admit that the Bible probably has something to say about those issues too, but most of them had to kind of sheepishly admit that they weren't speaking on that. Well, even doing the survey and even doing some of the work, I think, has caused some of them to rethink their priorities. And so we certainly need more of the Al Mohlers and Erwin Lutzers and Robert Jeffress and many others to address those issues. But I need to take a mandatory break, so let me do so, and we'll take some more phone calls on the other side of that break. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with more right after this.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the articles we posted here comes from ABC News, and I want to give them full credit for that. Written by James Gordon Meek and Brian Ross. You can probably watch it tonight on the news, but I wanted to give you the summary of it right now. The title of it, Terrorists Once Used Refugee Program to Settle in the United States. And they say of the 31 states, I just said 27 a minute ago, I guess it's up to 31 now, but of the 31 states that have declared their opposition to taking in Syrian refugees, one state, Kentucky, has a specific reason to be wary of the background check process. Previously, 2 Iraqi refugees settled in Bowling Green, and it turned out that they were al-Qaeda-linked terrorists with the blood of American soldiers on their hands. That comes from this latest ABC News investigation. Now, some of that goes back all the way a couple of years ago to 2013, but I'll cut to the chase pretty quickly because I want to take your phone. And they're Waid Ramadan Alwan and Mohammad Sharif Hamadi were caught on a surveillance video in a storage locker in Kentucky handling heavy weapons, including a Russian-made machine gun and a Stinger missile launcher, which the FBI said the men thought that would be smuggled to insurgents in Iraq. Now, to put this in perspective, Alwan, the first man I mentioned, Waid Ramadan Alwan, had been arrested in Kirkuk, Iraq in 2006, and during questioning confessed that he was an insurgent. And they also, of course, had evidence of both of these individuals at one time or another that actually had killed American soldiers. And I won't go into all the details because they went into a lab in the FBI. They actually keep, I did not know this until I saw this particular special, the remnants of all these IEDs. And, of course, then some of these IEDs don't explode completely. And so you have fingerprints. And so they were able to actually go back to this individual. And it turns out that they actually had all sorts of things from various intelligence tips, tapes, and the rest. But nevertheless, these 2 individuals from Iraq who are al-Qaeda terrorists used the Iraqi refugee program to come to America, and they settled in where? Kentucky. Sleep well, Kentucky. That's one story. And I think we're going to see many more. So the question that many of us are asking, I think it's a legitimate question. It's not mean-spirited. It doesn't mean that we're against Muslims or against Syrians, but it's a reasonable question. If we've seen Iraqi terrorists with al-Qaeda make their way to the United States and become citizens, or at least become part of the citizenry, I guess they never went through citizenship process, but become, just general members of the society, if you will, and turns out that they have blood on their hands and are actually engaged in some kind of terrorist activity and were actually caught in a sting operation, what chance do we have when we now talk about Syria, which is a failed state right now? I mean, in Iraq, you can go back. We had troops on the ground. We had some kinds of records. We have much less of that when we are now talking about Syrian refugees. And we had much more when we had Iraqi refugees, and some of those actually slipped through. So I think those are legitimate questions, but if you agree or disagree, that's why we call it Point of View. We'd love to hear your point of view. Let's head out to South Carolina, WGNN. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for taking my call. I heard Donald Trump mentioning that probably the best thing to do would be have safe zones in their own country where they would stay in their own country, and then even better would be train them to take their country back. I don't hear any other political group talking about, creating safe zones and then sending the ones that are here back once the safe zone is established.
Well, let's talk about them because I think it's a good idea. And I haven't talked about it much yet because a lot of what we've been talking about the last couple of days, what happened in Paris or the refugee issue. But okay, let's talk about that. And by the way, we're going to post an article here, what a responsible Syrian refugee policy looks like for the United States after Paris attacks. And this one comes from the Daily Signal, but it's written by James Carafano, who actually served in the previous administration. And so there's a lot in there. But let's just talk about about that one item. That is, there are some real merits to that. A safe zone, first of all, is less expensive. The estimates that come from Congress right now, and I have to trust them because they've run the numbers and I haven't, is it costs 12 times as much to bring a refugee here and to settle them as it would be to keep them there, wherever there might be. And it could be Turkey, it could be Saudi Arabia, it could be Jordan, it could be wherever it might be. Okay, so we'll leave the there left out for the moment, and thus then also give them a chance to maybe go back to their home country. A lot of the reason we don't have as many Christian refugees from Iraq here right now is a lot of them are in refugee camps with the hope that they could go to Ramadi or wherever it might be. And so I think that makes a lot more sense from a financial point of view, makes a lot more sense in terms of a settlement. Depends on something which this president doesn't seem dedicated to, and that is, in order to have a safe zone, you have to have boots on the ground. You just can't have, Air Force flying overhead. You'd have to have a military force to guarantee that safe zone, or else you would have to assume that those countries, Jordan, Turkey, whatever, would provide that. But again, that doesn't provide an alternative for the Christians, because in Muslim countries, Christians still get persecuted. But I think it has a lot more merit. Go ahead.
I agree with you on that. I think, I'd like to also see a lot of the Christians, get out and vote and start supporting people that support, their beliefs. And I hear you talking about 39 million stayed home, or didn't vote. So, I think supporting the candidates that have some can solve some problems like this, safe zones and we don't have to bring everybody here,
Well, we certainly don't. And that kind of gets back to the question Winston asked just a minute ago, and that is, he was asking about, the pulpits not necessarily addressing these issues. Well, part of that campaign that involves George Barna, and the other day we had George Barna by phone and Gary Frazier in studio, is number one, to help pastors recognize that they are not speaking to the topics that their congregation wants addressed. Many times they think, well, our congregation doesn't want to know that. Well, we can give them statistics to show that they do. You can find that on our website, and I've got an upcoming commentary coming out. I guess it's next week on that issue. So that's number one. Number two, it also is part of a process to identify that 39 million. And again, if you're just hearing those numbers, it's 39 million born-again Christians who did not vote in the last election. It's broken down into 1/3 and 2/3. About 1/3 of them, that is 13 million born-again Christians, were not registered to vote. So step number one, section number one, plan A, is to get those individuals who at least share our values to go out and register to vote. Then you have 26. And of course, they've developed this program and they've used it in one of the U.S. Senate races and some others, and want to develop it now for the presidential races. And that is to actually contact those individuals. And if indeed they show up on a database as an individual that is registered to vote but did not vote, but also as we compare that to the fact that they supported maybe the American Family Association, or they supported World Magazine. Okay, they probably have similar values to what we talk about here on Point of View, and we'll go encourage them, number one, to sign a pledge so that they will actually say they plan on voting, and then we'll contact them, those different groups. I'm not sure we, in the broadest sense of the word, would contact them and actually get them out in the polls. And I guarantee you get that many individuals who have those convictions out to the polls, you would change not only the presidential election, but you would change the senatorial and congressional elections as well. So I appreciate your comments, Mike, and let's give a few more of you a chance to join the conversation. Let's head up to Alaska. KJNP. Melody, you have the floor. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks. So I was just thinking, if this is going to happen, our governor here in Alaska has vowed to not protest the refugees at all, and there are thousands of them scheduled to arrive in Anchorage. And he has said he won't stop that. But as Christians, if this is going to happen, I think we need to look at it as an opportunity to be missionaries to Syria without going to Syria. I think it's
within an international student, that's a good idea. I think right now you should be contacting your local university and see if there are international students who like to come over for Thanksgiving or something. These are potential missionaries where if they become a Christian here, then someday they go back to their own country. They already know the language, they already know the culture, and they could be great missionaries. So I agree.
Exactly. I feel like God has moved people. You know, the Tower of Babel from the very beginning. He has moved people in various situations, and that it can be a good thing in that respect. I do, however, I am alarmed at the numbers I've seen of these refugees that are supposed to be young adult males, and I think that needs to be revisited. If they're capable of fighting in their homeland, then leave them there and send their families here, and we'll take care of their families while they fix their situation, while we help them fix their situation, and let us take care of the ones that need help. But I think that it's really alarming to look at the numbers that I've seen of capable young adult males that are coming here, and those are the ones that I question whether or not they are really refugees or if they are terrorists.
Good point. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to South Carolina. Kenneth, thank you for calling today. What would you like to add to the conversation?
I'd like to add 2 points. First of all, Christians in the United States, you said there are 39 million. We can affect anything. We could go out and evangelize and just stay there and let God have his way. We can stop a lot of this foolishness that's going on in America. But we don't evangelize and we don't talk. We don't go out and tell the goodness of Jesus Christ because we're a very powerful group, but we stay inside the four walls of the church. Secondly, America has blood on their hands also because of the things they did in the past. So God's going to rain on the just as well as the unjust. And basically, most of these cell groups are already in the United States. So I say to all the Christians out there, stand up and be accounted. For God you live and for God you die. And that's basically all I have to say, sir. Thank you so much for allowing me on the station. Thank you.
I appreciate you calling. By the way, that 39 million are just those who did not vote, and you get the numbers up to almost 90 million that have claimed some kind of born-again experience. I mean, they would be, if indeed all the Christians voted in unanimity, and they don't because there are differences between Christians that look at these issues from a political point of view and others who just simply ignore that, some who vote based upon their party affiliation and not because of their Christian convictions. But I mean, if we all voted en masse on one issue and agreed on at least a few issues, you would see some remarkable changes. Of course, he points out that maybe indeed we're under the judgment of God. That's, of course, the argument of Jonathan Cahn. But I think we still are called upon to be the salt of the earth and light of the world. And whatever the future may hold, we're to be Christians standing in the gap and speaking truth. And certainly I appreciate his admonition to evangelism. As you well know, we do programs from time to time on evangelism, and we need to do a few more of those. And matter of fact, next week we're going to talk a little bit more about some things to hopefully get us out of the news cycle. Normally, during the Thanksgiving Court has taken a break, and it gives us a chance to talk about some of these important issues. But this year, even if Congress were not in session, of course, they're going to go out of session tomorrow. They're going to vote today and tomorrow on some of these pieces of legislation, and then they will head back home, which is, I think, a great opportunity for you to let them know what you think about some of those issues. So please, if nothing else, take the time to attend any of these town hall meetings or contact your members of Congress and let them know what you think. If you'd like to write to your own member of Congress right now, we have our Take Action item, and a few hundred of you did respond to that, but again, it's still available. Take action and click on that button that says Block ISIS Terrorists Posing as Syrian Refugees. And so we give you a suggested comment that you can send to your representative, and then you hit that share send button, and it sends to them. And of course, you can share that with others as well. By the way, I was talking about sending, but also sharing is a good idea. And for those of you that say, well, I'd like to admit something, and that is I don't know who my representative is, the good news is if you know your address, you'll know who your representative is because it's set up on our computer. This is a very sophisticated program that actually figures out where you live and figures out who your representative is. So this would be a great way to find out who your representative is. And if you haven't taken the time to express your opinion to your representative, I would encourage you to do so. But next week would be a great opportunity for you to do that face to face while he or she is back in your particular area of the country. Let's head out to Alabama this time. Ken, what would you like to say?
Thank you, Kerby. You know, the silent church pulpit is not a new phenomenon. The late, great pastor, Dr. D. James Kennedy of the Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, one of his most famous sermons he ever gave was entitled, Will the Church Forget?, which, by the way, you can see on YouTube. I think that's an edited, a shortened version, but it is out there. And in that sermon, he made several remarks about, like there were so many murders this past week in the United States, quote, and 300,000 church pulpits were silent last week. Yeah. And then there were so many abortions this past week in America, and, quote, 300,000 church pulpits were silent. It's quite an interesting sermon. I highly recommend it to you and your listeners. One other name I'd like to just name drop real quick, and I'll get off. I'd like to recommend a true patriot pastor for you to have on your program, and that's Pastor David Whitney of the Cornerstone Evangelical Free Church in Pasadena, Maryland. He is a true patriot pastor and also heads up a educational program called the IOTC, the Institute on the Constitution, to train and educate people about our Constitution. You might want to contact him sometime.
Very good. Ken, I appreciate the recommendations. Of course, we used to work so very closely with D. James Kennedy when we had that radio station there in Fort Lauderdale, WAFG. Of course, we still bring Jerry Newcomb on. And of course, you hear the voice of Bob, who is actually somebody that used to work with Indeed, Bob Allen used to work with D. James Kennedy, so we have some connections there as well. Just about out of time. Let me see if I can run out to Missouri real quickly. KNEO. Eddie, I think I'll have to make you the last phone call of the day. What would you like to add?
Well, as far as Iraqis and so forth, they've been coming across the border for the last several years. I've got some Spanish-speaking friends. They are Spanish, and he's told me a couple of years ago that they're coming across, as well as other people from other countries. And my comment is that they fight. Yes, they do, but they fight different than our soldiers here do. And I feel that they could be trained over there the way we fight, but the way they fight there is completely different from the way we fight. And I just thought I'd let you know, yes, they've been coming across the border for years.
Pretty sad commentary. Indeed, we talked about that. And again, if you just joined us in the first part of this hour, I talked about some of the articles we've posted. 8 Syrians caught at the Texas border in Laredo. The article there talks about 5. Now we have a 6th Syrian that was caught with a fake passport in Honduras on the way to the United States. 6 men from Pakistan, actually 5 from Pakistan, 1 from Afghanistan, busted illegally entering Arizona from Mexico. And then, of course, we talked about some of these resettlement issues because as we've resettled so many, most of them been Muslim, not Christian. And, of course, then the story that I told you about Baton Rouge, where a number of these Syrian refugees were just dropped off. They were connected to an agency, in this case Catholic Charities, but they pointed out that one immigrant just got up and walked off, and they've never tracked him and don't know where he's going or what he plans to do. This is what's happening right now. Can you imagine when we up the total to 100,000 a year? Do you think we might have a difficulty, especially in light of what many of you will see if you watch ABC tonight, where Brian Ross talks about these 2 Iraqi terrorists who actually used the refugee program to make their way to Bowling Green, Kentucky, and then carry on some of their terrorist activities. And that's with Iraqi terrorists. Now we have the potential of Syrian terrorists. So I think there are some very important issues on the table. And that's why we're talking about it. Tomorrow, we will get into that in a lot more detail. We will have Penna Dexter with me. Jeremy Dice will be with me. Be related to the attack in Paris as well as the refugee program. But we'll also get into the commotion on college campuses right now, which we didn't have a chance to get to today, but we'll spend some time tomorrow talking about and what is happening there and why we should be concerned about it as well. So all sorts of things we try to cover here on Point of View. As we get closer to the Thanksgiving week, we also want to do some programs that take us out of the news cycle, as we did the first hour today. And if you didn't have a chance to hear that great interview, as we talked about George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, it's available on our website at pointofview.net. Just click on the podcast button and listen, or if you'd like to watch that, you can go to the YouTube channel and find it there as well. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Join us tomorrow for our weekend edition. We'll see you then.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.